0450 in the morning. Gulf of Oman, 40 miles southwest of Jask. The water is black and the sky is darker. Somewhere below the surface, a submarine smaller than a city bus is threading through the outer screen of one of the most powerful carrier groups on Earth. This is a hypothetical scenario built from real systems, real physics, and real doctrine for education and entertainment. Every capability described here exists. Every tactic described here has been studied. Now, back to 0450. The boat is a Ghadir-class Minisub, Iranian Navy, displacement around 120 tons submerged. At that moment, the crew believes they are invisible. For the next 8 minutes, they are almost right. Here is what matters about those 8 minutes. Because everything that follows comes down to a single physics lesson the Iranian crew forgot to study. Sound can be faked. Magnetism cannot. By 0458, a single MH-60R Seahawk helicopter will have found that submarine not with sonar, not with radar, but by reading a distortion in Earth's magnetic field roughly the size of a city block. The Ghadir crew will surface without firing a weapon. Their acoustic signature will be recorded in full, and the US Navy will know exactly what that boat sounds like for the rest of its operational life. Here's how that happens, step by step, system by system. The CENTCOM blockade has now turned back 10 commercial vessels in the past 72 hours. The diplomatic temperature across the region is running hot. Inside the carrier group, built around a nuclear-powered flat-top with an air wing of roughly 60 aircraft and a screen of Ghadir-class destroyers. The watch teams are running on compressed sleep and elevated threat posture. The ANSY-6 radar arrays on the escorts are sweeping continuously. Link 16 is saturated with contacts. Surface picture is clean. The subsurface picture is where the problem lives. Because in the littoral zone, shallow, thermally layered, acoustically chaotic water. A small diesel-electric submarine running on battery is, without exaggeration, one of the hardest targets in naval warfare. Not because it is fast, not because it is deep, but because of what water does to sound. Sound in the ocean does not travel in straight lines. It bends. Warm surface water and cold deep water have different densities. And where they meet, the thermocline, the acoustic path bends sharply downward or upward depending on the geometry. A submarine sitting just below a strong thermocline layer can effectively hide from hull-mounted sonar on a surface ship above it because the active pings bend away before they reach the hull. The return never comes back. It is not a stealth coating or an anechoic tile. It is pure physics. The ocean itself becomes the cloaking device. Think of it like a highway overpass. The cars on top cannot see what is parked in the shadow directly underneath because the structure between them blocks the line of sight. The thermocline is the overpass. Tonight, the thermocline in this sector sits at roughly 80 meters depth. The Ghadir is running at 70. Right in the shadow, diesel engines shut down. Electric motors at minimum revolutions, making less acoustic noise than a whale song. The carrier group's hull sonars on the Ghadir-class escorts are reading almost nothing useful below that layer. Active pings from a towed array SQS-53 are bending around the contact. Sonar range that would normally reach 10 nautical miles has been cut to under 2. For 8 minutes, the math genuinely favors a $1 billion submarine over $4 billion of American hardware. That detail stayed with me when I first went through the operational parameters of the Ghadir program. 120 tons of diesel boat, built in a country under sanctions, threading past the most sophisticated carrier screen in history by exploiting a layer of warm water. The asymmetry is almost offensive. But here is the complication that changes everything. The carrier group is not running a single sensor picture tonight. The watch officer knows the thermocline is there. Oceanographic data from P8A. Poseidon passes earlier that evening flagged the layer depth and its acoustic impact precisely. What the Ghadir crew has not accounted for is that the Americans already switched to a different sense, not sound. Magnetism. 22 minutes before the Ghadir left its patrol area near Jask, an MH-60R Hawk from the carrier's air wing was already airborne and working a sector grid roughly 8 miles from the contact datum. The crew is not hunting the Ghadir specifically at this point. They are running a standard barrier search ahead of the carrier's track, dropping sonobuoys and working the acoustic picture. The sonobuoys are giving them noise. The layer is killing the returns. A standard passive sonobuoy pattern in this thermocline is essentially useless below the 80-meter shelf. So the Seahawk crew does what doctrine calls for when acoustics degrade. They go magnetic. The ANASQ-81 magnetic anomaly detector, the MAT, works on a principle that has nothing to do with sound, radar, or any signal the submarine emits. Every object with significant iron or steel content distorts the local magnetic field of the Earth. A submarine pressure hull contains hundreds of tons of steel. That steel bends the planet's magnetic field lines around it, the way a rock bends the current in a stream, subtly, but measurably. If you are close enough and your sensor is sensitive enough, the MAD detects that distortion. The key number. MAD detection range in typical conditions runs to roughly 500 meters from the sensor to the hull. That is not impressive compared to sonar. Under normal conditions, clear acoustics, good layer, no thermocline interference, you would never use MAD as your primary sensor because sonar reaches 10 times further. But tonight, the thermocline has blinded the acoustic picture, and MAD is the sense that still works. The Ghadir can mask its sound. It cannot remove the iron from its pressure hull. What is most surprising about this scenario is not that the Americans had MAD capability. That technology has existed since World War II. What is surprising is how rarely adversaries plan for the sensor switching problem. They train against one detection method and assume that defeating it defeats the hunt. That assumption is the flaw. At 0447, the Seahawk crew gets an anomaly read, faint but consistent. The pilot banks into a low racetrack pattern, dropping altitude to roughly 100 feet off the water. The MAD cable trails behind the aircraft on its boom. The sensor itself is physically separated from the helicopter to reduce interference from the aircraft's own metal. The crew runs the track twice more. The anomaly moves, slowly, on a consistent heading. This is not a geological feature, this is a contact. The crew drops a tight ring of SSQ-53 directional sonobuoys around the datum, not to detect the submarine acoustically through the layer, but to fix its position more precisely and to listen for any transient sound that leaks upward through the thermal gap. One of the buoys catches a faint blade rate signature, the electric motor's propeller turning at low RPM. Not enough to classify on its own. Combined with the MAD track, classification is Ghadir type. Confidence is high. The Seahawk now has a fire control solution. The crew could have a Mk-54 lightweight torpedo in the water in under 40 seconds. That option is on the table. It stays there. Put yourself in the position of the watch officer aboard the carrier. You have a confirmed contact, a hostile submarine inside your screen, within theoretical torpedo range of the task force. You have a weapons solution. The rules of engagement under current force protection posture authorize a defensive response. And yet the call that comes back down from the battle staff is not weapons-free. It is something more precise. The decision reflects a doctrine that often gets lost in tactical discussions. In the Shadow War, the most valuable outcome is not the destroyed submarine. It is the recorded submarine. A Ghadir that is sunk tells you nothing new. A Ghadir that surfaces, scared, exposed, with its full acoustic and magnetic signature captured on every sensor the Seahawk and the escorting berg, carry, becomes a permanent entry in the U.S. Navy's ascent database. Every time that hull goes to sea for the rest of its operational life, the Americans will know it. The captain, the crew, the IRGC's submarine command, they will never again operate with the assumption of anonymity. Here is the take that will probably get pushback. This restraint is not weakness. It is the strategically superior choice, and it is one the IRGC has consistently failed to anticipate because their doctrine still prizes the tactical provocation over the informational defeat. They optimize to threaten. The Americans increasingly optimize to record. The Seahawk crew activates the ANCQS-22 dipping sonar, lowered through the thermocline layer on a cable, and gets a clean active return from directly beneath. The geometry is now perfect. The submarine is bracketed by the sonobuoy ring, painted by the dipping sonar, and the MAD track gives continuous position updates. At 0456, the Seahawk transmits on the International Guard frequency, the maritime distress and communication channel that every vessel at sea monitors. The transmission is brief, professionally worded, unambiguous. The message is, "We have you. Surface immediately." 2 minutes of silence. Then the water around the contact begins to churn white. Ballast tanks blowing. The Ghadir breaks the surface at 0458. What the crew surfaces into is a ring of sensors that has been recording them continuously for 11 minutes. The Seahawk holds its hover. A second MH-60R, launched from the Burke-class escort USS Fitzgerald operating on the group's southern flank, arrives on scene within 4 minutes. The carrier's E-2D Hawkeye, airborne radar and command and control aircraft, has the whole picture on its tactical display, fed through Link 16 to every ship in the group. There is no weapon in the water. There are no visible damage control issues on the Iranian boat. The Ghadir rides low and still in the 4-foot Gulf swell, its small conning tower gleaming wet under the Seahawk's searchlight. For the crew inside, this is the worst outcome possible. Worse, in certain ways, than an exchange of fire. They have not been sunk. They have been exposed. Their entire approach, the thermocline hide, the battery silent running, the patience of 8 minutes inside the American screen, has been unraveled in detail, cataloged, and is now feeding a threat library the U.S. Navy will reference for the next decade. We spent time looking at the ascent, acoustic intelligence, collection doctrine, and one detail keeps coming back: the signature captured during a live unsuspecting approach, with the boat at its quietest and most careful, is exponentially more valuable than anything captured during a surface encounter or a formal exercise. The Ghadir crew was trying to be invisible. That meant they were operating at their minimum acoustic output, and that minimum is now on file. By 0515, the Ghadir has confirmed its identity to the carrier group's surface action officer via maritime radio. It is directed to hold its position and not submerge. An Iranian surface patrol vessel, a Paycop-type fast attack craft dispatched from Jask, arrives 2 hours later to escort the Minisub back toward the coast. The carrier group resumes its track through the Gulf of Oman. The watch teams stand down from their elevated posture. The Seahawk crew logs the contact, transfers the full sensor recording to the carrier's intelligence team, and lands aboard at 0640. No shots fired, no casualties, no international incident beyond a tense radio exchange. And yet something has changed. Here is the doctrinal truth the Ghadir mission illustrates, and this is the lesson that matters regardless of which navy you study. Stealth is not a permanent condition. It is a temporary advantage that exists only while the enemy is limited to the specific sense you have defeated. The Ghadir crew had a legitimate, well-executed plan to defeat active hull sonar. They used the thermocline correctly. They ran their battery profile correctly. They maintained noise discipline correctly. On the acoustic dimension, they were good, maybe very good. The problem is that acoustic is one dimension on a multidimensional sensor picture. And the Americans, facing a degraded acoustic environment, did exactly what their doctrine told them to do. They switched to a sense the adversary had not planned to beat. Sound was masked, magnetism was not. This pattern appears in different forms across every domain of modern warfare. The radar-absorbing coating that defeats X-band but not L-band. The GPS jammer that blinds precision navigation but enables passive detection of the jamming source. The thermal camouflage that defeats infrared but not millimeter wave radar. Every time a platform optimizes to defeat one sensor, it creates a residual signature that another sensor can read. The Ghadir's pressure hull, by being made of steel, could not help but be a giant magnet. You can engineer quieter propulsion. You can coat your hull in anechoic tiles. You cannot remove the iron. What this tells us about the broader competition in the Gulf is worth sitting with. The IRGC has invested heavily in asymmetric tools, fast boats, drones, minisubs that exploit specific sensor blind spots. The Ghadir is legitimate. It is genuinely hard to find in literal water with hull sonar alone. But the American response has not been to build a better hull sonar. It has been to field a multi-sensor kill chain, where each sensor covers a different physical dimension, so that defeating one of them only tells the adversary they have been detected by a different one. The Seahawk with MAD is one piece of that chain. The P-8A Poseidon overhead with wide-area sonobuoy patterns is another. The VL Azrock aboard the Burke-class escorts provides the standoff weapon, option, and the Virginia-class submarines operating in deep water beyond the group provide a subsurface picture that no Iranian surface action can observe. The Ghadir crew, threading toward the carrier, was moving through a layered detection architecture they could only partially see, and could only partially plan against. One thing about MAD that almost nobody talks about. The sensor was developed in the 1940s, and its basic physics have not changed. What has changed is the processing. Early MAD systems produced a single analog trace that required a trained operator to interpret in real time. Easy to misread under workload. Modern systems like the AN/ASQ81 and its successors feed their magnetic gradient data into signal processing. Algorithms that can discriminate between geological anomalies, surface ship wakes, and submarine hulls with high confidence, even at the fringes of detection range. The sensor is old. The intelligence behind it is new. That combination, mature sensor, modern processing, is what lets the MH-60R crew call a classification within minutes of the first anomaly ping rather than the hours it once required. The Ghadir crew was not defeated by a new weapon. They were defeated by a very old physics principle that the Americans had simply gotten very good at reading. Will the RG find an answer to the magnetic anomaly problem? The engineering challenge is real. Degaussing systems that reduce a submarines. Magnetic signature exist, and larger navies use them. Whether a program under sanctions, working with constrained materials and limited shore infrastructure, can field-effective degaussing on a 120-ton minisub in a reasonable time frame is the open question the next chapter of this story depends on. Comment yes if you think the IRGC adapts, or NO if you think the physics wins every time. We read everyone. If the layered sensor architecture of the carrier group is the kind of system you want to understand in depth, the episode on how the E-2D Hawkeye ties the whole kill chain together, from the P-8A overhead down to the Burke's VL ASROC, is the logical next stop. That one goes places this episode could not. Subscribe if you want to come back smarter. We'll see you in the next one.